Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are diving into a really incredible 2,000-year-old intellectual mystery. To do this, we're going to be pulling some genuinely groundbreaking insights, specifically from the preface and the introduction of Yung-Chang Zhou's new book draft called In View of Practice. We're going to take a modern analytical framework and apply it directly to one of the most intense, sophisticated, and honestly stubbornly unresolved philosophical debates in human history. Let's get right into it.
So here is the core mystery we're unpacking. During China's Warring States period, you had four major philosophical heavy hitters: Confucianism, Mohism, Taoism, and legalism. And they all emerged from the exact same historical crisis. They argued with each other for 2 straight centuries with unbelievable sophistication. But here's the catch: they never converged. Now, standard history often tells us, they were just stubborn, or maybe pre-modern communication was just too flawed. But as the introduction of our source text brilliantly reveals, the truth is actually much more structural and far, far more fascinating than that.
To really understand why, we have to look at the inciting incident. Picture this: the year is 632 BCE. Duke Wen of Jin stands before the ancestral tablets. The ceremonial forms are flawlessly executed, right down to the last detail. But everyone in the room knows the actual authority those forms represent is completely dead. As the text so perfectly puts it, the ritual was perfect, the social order was collapsing. I mean, just imagine the intense cognitive dissonance of living in a society where the ceremonial forms persist, but the actual social order they're supposed to be organizing is just crumbling right in front of your eyes.
Section 1. The Sound of Collapse. Let's take a look at this historical crisis.
If we walk through this timeline, we see something pretty incredible. During the Western Zhou period, society operated beautifully, smooth as silk. And ironically, during that golden age of order, there was almost zero philosophy. Why? Well, because the rules just worked. They were totally invisible. But as populations boomed, wealth shifted around, and new military tech like the crossbow emerged, that old system became entirely decoupled from reality. Essentially, the operating system of society crashed hard. And that directly brings us to the Warring States period, which was basically a desperate 200-year debate on how exactly to reboot civilization.
And what we really need to take away from this is a profound realization highlighted right in the preface of our source material. Philosophy arises not from curiosity, but from breakdown. Think about it. As long as a society's rules function invisibly, literally no one questions them. You don't ask why the rules exist when they're producing harmony, right? These ancient thinkers only started debating because their societal operating system suffered a catastrophic, unrecoverable error.
Section 2. Rules of the Game. Let's introduce a Rawlsian framework.
To actually figure out what these ancient philosophers were arguing about, our source author, Yung-Chang Zhou, borrows a brilliant concept from John Rawls's 1955 paper, Two Concepts of Rules. Rawls talks about something called constitutive rules. Now, these aren't just your everyday guidelines. They are the foundational rules that make an activity possible in the very first place. Think about chess. The rules of chess don't just tell you how to move a knight, they literally create the knight. Without those rules, moving a carved piece of wood across a checkered board means absolutely nothing at all.
And this perfectly illustrates the crucial difference between what we might assume these ancient Chinese schools were doing versus what they were actually doing. On one side, we have summary or regulative rules. Think of a speed limit. It regulates a behavior that already exists, driving. But on the other side, we have constitutive rules. As our source text points out, the early Chinese schools weren't just offering summary rules or simple behavioral advice like a speed limit. No, they were proposing entirely new constitutive rules. They were literally offering completely different social operating systems.
Which leads us to this super important distinction: action level versus practice level justification. An action level justification is validating a move inside the game, like saying, "Oh, I moved my pawn to protect my king." Makes sense. But a practice-level justification is stepping outside the game entirely and evaluating the system itself. Asking, hey, is chess actually a good game to play? When the Zhou dynasty collapsed, these philosophers weren't arguing about the best move inside the old system because the old system was completely broken. They were engaged in a massive practice-level debate about what the new game should be.
Section 3. 4 Incompatible Blueprints.
So here is a fantastic bird's-eye view of the 4 incompatible frameworks that emerged. As the introduction of our source makes explicitly clear, these were not just slightly different theories about a shared subject. Not at all. They were 4 completely different proposals for how to build the foundational rules of reality. We're going to take a really deliberate look at this because understanding the mechanics of each specific proposal is the absolute key to solving our 2,000-year-old mystery. Let's break them down one by one.
First up, Confucianism. It is incredibly important to understand that Confucius did not want to invent a new game. His proposal was fundamentally a restoration project. He looked around and diagnosed the societal collapse not as a flaw in the old Zhou rules, but as a loss of moral substance in the people playing the game. Basically, rituals were just being performed as empty, theatrical acts. For Confucius, ritual, or li, was a constitutive technology meant to restore that moral substance to inherited roles. He wanted people to stop just acting and start genuinely inhabiting their duties.
Then we have Mohism. Mosey looked at the exact same societal collapse but made a completely different structural diagnosis. He believed the old Zhou rules were just inherently flawed from the get-go because they placed partiality, favoring your own family or your own faction, at the very foundation of society. It was a bug in the code. So Mosey's solution was a two-tier architecture. He wanted to reprogram the operating system by putting universal impartial concern at the very bottom, at the practice level. His logic was, if the foundational rules demand impartial benefit for everyone, well then people can safely pursue their own particular interests at the action level without destroying society.
Next is Taoism, which honestly offers a fascinating critique of those first two. The Taoists basically argued that the very act of explicitly writing down positive rules, which is exactly what the Confucians and Mohists wanted to do, is the exact thing that causes fake, performative, strategic behavior. Think about it. If you tell people exactly how to be good, they'll just act the part to get ahead, right? Instead, Taoism proposes negatively defined enabling rules, often known as wu-wei. So instead of directing behavior, they wanted a minimal operating system that just prevents interference. That way, a natural, spontaneous order is enabled to flourish on its own.
And finally, we have legalism. Legalism is really the limiting case here. They looked at the other three schools and essentially said, guys, you are all relying on things that are way too rare or too fragile, like inner virtue or spontaneous attunement. It's never going to work. So legalism completely abandoned the quest for deep moral internalization. Instead, they proposed an operating system built almost entirely on regulative control. They used explicit, unavoidable laws and strict administrative techniques to just channel basic human self-interest. They didn't care about making you good. They cared about forcing predictable compliance to build immense, competitive state power.
Section 4. Why they never agreed. The problem of incommensurable ends.
Okay, so to put this as clearly as possible, you cannot use the rules of chess to win a game of checkers. It just doesn't work. These ancient thinkers were never debating the best move in a shared game. They were playing entirely different games. The preface of our source establishes this beautifully. An argument that makes perfect, flawless sense inside the rules of Mohism carries absolutely zero weight inside the rules of Confucianism, because the very foundation of what constitutes good or valid is entirely different for both of them.
Philosophers call this incommensurability. The limits of this kind of practice-level debate are incredibly strict. Interestingly, the schools even use the exact same vocabulary, like the word heaven, but it masks totally incompatible meanings. For a Mohist, heaven was this impartial enforcer of utility, but for a Taoist, heaven was a natural pattern that fundamentally resisted capture. So when a Mohist logically dismantled a Confucian argument, the Confucian didn't disagree because the logic was bad. They disagreed because the Mohist's argument was literally incomprehensible within the constitutive premises of the Confucian operating system.
And this brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought I want to leave you with today. If the 200-year philosophical deadlock of ancient China was really a battle over the foundational constitutive rules of reality, what are the invisible constitutive rules of our society today? What are the rules we are enacting right now, tacitly, without even realizing it? And maybe more importantly, what happens when our operating system stops working and those invisible rules suddenly become visible? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the rules of the game.